It is such an honor to be here with you this evening. And I need to tell you a little bit about myself that you may or may not know. I have 4 daughters and 9 grandchildren. 4 of those grandchildren are women and 5 are men. So I've got all kinds of mixed heritage here to throw into the gender debate. I also had an extremely unconventional path to the presidency. And with apologies to all my colleagues from the University of Arizona who've heard this before, I think it's important for you to know how this fits into the remarks I would like to make this evening. I declined to take the general battery of the graduate record exam when I graduated from college because no way in Hades was I ever going to go back to college. I was finished, I was done. I had to take the history exam, and I took it, and that was it. Didn't sign up for it, and laughed my way all the way to the future. I put my husband through law school. We married when I was almost 20. My mother says that doesn't count. I was 19. Randy was 20, and we have been self-supporting, absolutely self-supporting, all these years. We are approaching our 46th wedding anniversary. So we made it work. The story I want to tell you this evening is a little bit about the partnership that makes that possible, but I really want to say at the beginning that the one message I want you to hear tonight is that there is no one key path, that you compose this life as you go along. You don't. And I know that a lot of people have a real linear vision of exactly where they're going to be and exactly how they're going to play this out. But it is not my experience that that happens, and it is my experience and the experience of other women who study this issue, whom I admire, that women are more likely to take varied paths to the same desired outcomes. So celebrating and promoting women's leadership is really important to us because even though we would think that many of those questions have been settled, as Bill said, the work of the Women's Salon toward accomplishing this mission recognizes inherently that we haven't solved the problem. You know, much has been written about female styles of leadership, about women in leadership, about what a leader is, how a leader acts, what a leader looks like. If you are the least bit interested in the reading on leadership, right after World War II, there were literally physical descriptions of what a leader looks like. I'll bet you can tell me what they were. And they don't match the person standing in front of you. I found this national discussion to be very interesting and came into focus for me during the 2008 presidential election, when we had hoped that issues about what a leader looks like might have been settled, and yet immediately in the debate, we were subjected to questions about how could an African American or a woman possibly be the President of the United States? A lot of people dodged it, but as you recall, there were people who took it on head on. To some, this was an idea whose time had come, and I was among them. Others warned that we were not ready to confront our entrenched racism or sexism, and some were very blatant about that sexist tactic and overall character of the candidates. I can tell you that when I was appointed, the chairman of the Board of Regents actually received phone calls asking him if he was crazy to appoint a woman as the president of the University of Arizona. So I'm telling you that that era is not over. Now, we have a lot of expectations for leaders, and we have all kinds of expectations for how they will behave, and many of those expectations are discouraging to women, as Bill pointed out. People don't look like us. The leaders we know might not look like us. They might not talk like us. We don't know how to identify with them. And if you don't identify with a leader, then how do you decide that you want to emulate that person and follow in their footsteps? Many of you may have read the October 1, 2012 issue of Newsweek, where Deborah Spar, the president of Barnard College and a former Harvard University professor, argued that the problems we face are subtle. She said, they come partly from the media, partly from society, partly from biology, and partly from our own vastly unrealistic expectations. To address them, we must go beyond either policy solutions or anger with the patriarchy. We must instead forge our partnerships with those around us and begin to dismantle the myth of solitary perfection. That's our theme. We are going to dismantle the myth of solitary perfection and get a good chuckle every time we yell, "Bear down." I do chuckle every time I yell "Bear down." I've been there. What I would like to share with you this evening is my personal story of challenging myself to find and develop my own path to leadership, while rejecting what Dr. Spar calls the myth of the quest for perfection. And I have to acknowledge to you at the outset that that journey was not free of guilt and self-recrimination. So I'm not laying out a path to you that left me in total Zen peace through the entire process. I'm the mother of 4 daughters, so that's not possible. I took my theme today from Dr. Mary Catherine Bateson, Margaret Mead's daughter, whose book, Composing a Life, examines the way in which women's careers and lives often emerge like a jazz composition, composed during the interaction among the musicians rather than a linear process of composition. I do want you to know that there is a background from which I speak. Even with the progress we have achieved, while 75% of all teachers in K-12 public education are women, women dominate the public education workforce. Only 41% of public elementary school principals are women, and women represent, even now, only 26% of all public high school principals. As you move into higher education, the statistics are also discouraging. Women are less likely to achieve tenure, receive less research funding, and publish fewer works than their male colleagues. And they get paid less. So why would anybody pursue a career in higher education leadership? In July 2012, as I said, I was named the 21st president of the University of Arizona, and I was keenly aware that the press release announcing my appointment and nearly every news story that followed referred to me as the first female president of the University of Arizona. In fact, that was the common lead-in of identification, the first female. It's a pretty amazing descriptor when you think that we live longer and represent over half the population of the world. It begs the question, why is that one fact so noteworthy? Is it because some barrier has been broken? Because I will remain an outlier long beyond my tenure as president? I certainly hope not. I did not set out to be the first female of anything. In fact, as I told you, I gleefully left when I graduated from the university, hoping to have a very traditional homemaker life. But I did set out to have a fulfilling life and to follow my passion, to do meaningful things, big and small, in my professional and personal life, and discovered as I went what that meant. This hasn't been easy, as I said. This isn't peace and tranquility. I've had to balance priorities, as have many of you and many of the men in our lives, and have had to make tough choices, as has the man in my life. It meant that when my graduate students, wondering why I wasn't hanging around with them at the office at 7 p.m. or meeting with others of them at the local watering hole, asked me if I worked faster or smarter than my colleagues, I asked them why. And they said, well, you don't seem to work as hard. It was because I was home, and that work that was invisible to them happened at 2 a.m. in front of my computer. And I wondered why the women graduate students were asking me the same question. It never occurred to them that I shouldn't be available at 7 o'clock in the evening, even though I had 4 little girls at home. It meant I had other priorities, and I must confess that sometimes I felt a little resentful about explaining those. I once said to a particularly needy graduate student, I have 4 children. I don't need any more. If you want to know what your colleagues think, said Dr. Spar, you don't, in fact, have to spend endless hours chatting over coffee. I do not think that my personal and professional goals are particularly unique. I certainly have found them among many, many women. Leaders that I admire seem to have had similar desires and fulfillment to do something that they're passionate about. And for the women leaders I admire, those desires are important enough to drive them to push boundaries and challenge expectations. One of my favorite historians, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who had a very, very traditional full-time homemaker life until her children were raised and she had the audacity to go to graduate school at the University of New Hampshire, wrote a wonderful book about midwives in the 1600s that you may have read. And one of my favorite sayings from Laurel Thatcher Ulrich is, well-behaved women seldom make history. I admire the simplicity of this statement and the breadth of the meaning that it inspires for women to pursue the things they value and not be intimidated by a societal expectation of what being well-behaved means. Social action, the right and necessity of saying no to conditions in our society we believe are harmful to the common good, and yes to the actions and values in others we believe will benefit our lives and the lives of our communities and our future. These are activities that women are willing to step into, and they all require that we step away from conventional expectations of how nice girls, proper ladies, and well-behaved women should conduct themselves. In these actions, leaders are born, and that's what I want to talk to you about. In December 1983, the official date on my PhD diploma, my husband Randy gave me a book for Christmas. The book, called Annapurna's A Woman's Place, by Arlene Bloom, is about the 1978, now seemingly a long time ago, assault of the first all-woman mountaineering team in the Himalayas. Annapurna has a disquieting history. Its name means harvest goddess, and the mountain has reaped a bitter harvest indeed. The book Randy gave me is thrilling, suspenseful, grueling, and inspiring. Only 2 of the 13 women on the team and 2 Sherpas reached the summit, and 2 other women lost their lives on the ascent 2 days later. But the reason I mention this event today, inspiring as it is like Bill said, it takes a team. Randy gave me the book and wrote, "Go for it." Inside that book was also a note. I always do this. So those of you who don't know, Jan knows, I carry tissues to commencement. And I am famous at the university for needing mineral water and tissues. So I will tell you that this note was inside that book. I think I know what she meant. But for some reason, she slipped it into the book unopened. And I didn't find it for years. Allison just had her second child. I'm not an 8,000-meter mountaineer. You know, when I read about the Sherpas on Everest, I just thought, why do people do this? I don't get it. I always tease Allison about being the real doctor, because she has an MD and she's a nephrologist. I was a full-time mom for over 7 years and had 4 children, and other women do the things they do with caregivers and the help and support of others. My point is, it doesn't matter. If it works for you and your family and it helps you all succeed, that's what we do. We go forward with the support and help of our families, and we reject the myth of perfection, and we set aside guilt. You know, there's plenty of guilt to go around. And your children will make you feel guilty. You don't need to let your career make you feel guilty. They're really, really good at this. So what I've done for the presentation, the rest of my presentation here this evening, is I've taken my theme from the children's alphabet song, the ABCs. And all of us memorize it. We all teach it to our children, our nieces, our nephews, our friends. It's just one of those first things that are fun to teach. And I talked one of my granddaughters, who will be 13 in August, into making this video for me a long, long time ago. So Elise Hart Baker is who you're going to hear from. And she's now in the 7th grade. And her tiny little sister, Lucia, who is now the champion in her age and class downhill skier at Big Sky, Montana, is kibitzing in the background. And I just want you to hear what Elise has to say about leadership.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my ABCs. Next time won't you sing with me?
Yay! Good work.
Bye.
Say, I love you, Nana.
I love you, Nana.
So, bear with me. I want to carry through this theme of multiple paths by going through the ABCs of women leaders, with apologies to the incredible women leaders that are not recognized in this brief overview. Starting with A. Marion Anderson was born in Philadelphia. She attended William Penn High School and then transferred to South Philadelphia High School to focus on music and singing. She applied to a local music school, but, surprise, was rejected because of her color. She persevered and became a noted mezzo-soprano who sang for kings, queens, and presidents. She faced, as you know, considerable racism when performing in the United States. Regarding this, she said, "I always bear in mind that my mission is to leave behind me the kind of impression that will make it easier for those who follow me." Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman to be awarded an MD degree in the U.S. She faced many obstacles on the road to achieving her goal. She was rejected by all of the major medical schools in the country and was only accepted to Geneva Medical School because they thought her application was a joke. Nevertheless, she succeeded in completing her education, but she was barred from practicing in New York City hospitals, so she set up her own. She even founded a women's medical college to train other women physicians. You all know about Shirley Chisholm. She was the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Congress. In 1972, she conducted the first large-scale presidential campaign by a black or female candidate from either major party. You may be less familiar with Tammy Duckworth, Major in the U.S. Army, who joined the ROTC as a graduate student, training as a helicopter pilot, because that was one of the few combat jobs available to women at the time. When she was studying for her PhD in political science, her National Guard unit was called up for a tour in Iraq. She lost both her legs and most of her right arm when her Black Hawk helicopter was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Despite this terrible personal tragedy, she became a vocal advocate on behalf of wounded veterans, ran for Congress, and was appointed director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs. She has served as Assistant Secretary of Public and International Governmental Affairs for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and when she ran again for Congress in 2012, she was elected to represent the 8th Congressional District of Illinois in the U.S. House of Representatives. Another woman you may not know much about, Gertrude Bell Elian, devoted her career to medical research, creating drugs to combat childhood leukemia, malaria, herpes, autoimmune disorders, including AIDS. She almost did not begin her career when at 19, she was denied admission to 15 different graduate schools and was forced to work as an unpaid lab assistant in order to have the opportunity to further her research in science. She went on to achieve her PhD and eventually the Nobel Prize. Ella Fitzgerald was perhaps the greatest jazz musician and singer the world has ever known. When touring worldwide, she demanded that her pay be equal to that of her white tour mates, making her one of the first African-American artists to successfully demand and receive pay equity. Katharine Graham followed a far different path to leadership. She became the owner and publisher of the Washington Post upon the death of her husband in 1963, and went on to become one of the most powerful and courageous women in American media. Her leadership in informing the public about the Watergate break-in changed the course of American political history in the face of major litigation. You may not have heard much about Dolores Huerta, but she is one of the 20th century's most respected labor leaders. She co-founded the United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez. Huerta left her successful elementary school teaching career because, in her words, "I couldn't stand seeing kids come to class hungry and needing shoes. I thought I could do more by organizing farm workers than by trying to teach their hungry children." Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of the novels we have all known and loved, Little House on the Prairie, Little House in the Big Woods, and so many others. These were all based on her own life, and the hardships that she described were very real. Today, her books are published in more than 40 languages. Mae Jamison, a medical doctor, Police Corps volunteer, engineer, astronaut, and businesswoman, was the first African-American woman in space. Dr. Jamison has said, "I had to learn very early not to limit myself due to others' limited imaginations. I have learned never to limit anyone else due to my own limited imagination." Maggie Kuhn personified the notion that well-behaved women seldom make history. Forced to retire at 65 after a career of social activism, Kuhn and a group of parents joined together to give voice to the interests of seniors in America, founding the organization that became known as the Gray Panthers. Here are 3 additional women who pioneered history. After meeting Sir Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides in the UK, Juliette Gordonlow, known as Daisy, returned to the United States and gathered 18 girls together saying, "I've got something for the girls of Savannah and of all America." As the first president of the Girl Scouts of America, she gave girls the opportunity to develop self-reliance and resourcefulness, and prepared them not just to become homemakers, but also for a future as professional women. Lynn Margulis was a young assistant professor of biology at Boston University in 1966 when she wrote a theoretical essay called The Origin of Mitosing Eukaryotic Cells. Margulis argued that all eukaryotic cells, which include every cell in our bodies except red blood cells, evolved in symbiosis with bacteria. The essay was rejected by 15 journals before being published in 1967 by the Journal of Theoretical Biology. Today, that essay and the book that grew out of it are cornerstones of modern biology. And when she passed away in 2011, Dr. Margulis was a distinguished university professor at the University of Massachusetts and winner of the National Medal Science Award. You probably heard of Indra Nooyi, who was named the president and CEO of beverage giant Pepsi in October 2006. She is the first woman to lead the company and is consistently one of the most highly ranked women on Fortune magazine's annual list of 100 most powerful women. Boy, when you go through the ABCs of women, you really see some shining examples. For Arizona, Sandra Day OConnor was the first woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. She graduated third in her class at Stanford Law School, but was unable to find a law firm willing to hire her as anything other than a secretary. So she turned to public service and full-time homemaking. After taking time off to raise her children, she established her own successful practice in Arizona instead of applying to law firms, and was elected to the Arizona Superior Court. After her ascension to the Arizona Court of Appeals, President Reagan nominated her to the U.S. Supreme Court, where, as you recall, her active, pragmatic, and centrist conservatism made her an influential leader in American jurisprudence for years. Denied a bachelor's degree in 1892 because she was a woman, Mary Engel Pennington, who looks a little stern in this photo, went on to earn her PhD in chemistry. She became chief of the USDA's Food Research Lab and led the development of methods for the safe packaging and handling and preservation of perishable food. Hugely important to our future. Anne Quinlan, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author, has spent 25 years chronicling the intricacies of women's lives. She left the New York Times in the middle of an extremely successful career to focus on raising her children and writing novels, both of which she has done with success. In fact, she has written 5 best-selling novels, 3 of which have been made into movies, and I'm sure her role as a mother has been equally successful. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss-born psychiatrist who wrote the groundbreaking book on death and dying in 1969, which I'm sure many of you have quoted without realizing that it was a woman who developed the construct. The book introduced what became known as the Kubler-Ross model of the 5 stages of grief. Her ideas were quite revolutionary at the time, but since then have become a standard for coping not just with death and dying, but also with all kinds of trauma and personal change. One of Hollywood Reporter's most powerful women in entertainment, Anne Sweeney is the award-winning television executive responsible for Disney's entertainment and news properties. In addition to an impeccable career in broadcasting, she is credited with engineering Disney's tween revolution, for which we will forgive her, which turns shows like Hannah Montana and High School Musical into multi-billion-dollar franchises. Not one to rest on her laurels, Sweeney recently announced that she is stepping down from her post at Disney to become a television director. Shirley Tilghman is a renowned molecular biologist who received her PhD in biochemistry at Temple University. In addition to her reputation as a scholar, she has been a national leader on behalf of women in science. In 2012, she completed her final year as the 19th president of Princeton University. Agata Uwiringiyimana was a chemistry teacher in Rwanda, a trailblazer in that role alone, as few girls in Africa were even allowed to study science in the 1960s. And you may not have heard of her because her career didn't last very long. She went on to become a social activist, founding a savings and credit cooperative for the staff of her school district. Her interest in economic development led her to serve as Rwanda's director of the Ministry of Commerce and later as its first female prime minister. Her reformist views, especially those that sought to eliminate ethnic quota practices that limited access to education, training, and small business capital, resulted in her assassination. She was one of the first victims of the Rwandan genocide. Retired Brigadier General Wilma Vaught is one of the most highly decorated women in the military history. She was the first woman to deploy in an Air Force bomber suit serving in Vietnam. As a founder of the Women in Military Service for the American Memorial Foundation, Vaught spearheaded the campaign that raised more than $20 million and created the first major memorial to honor the nearly 2 million women who have served in the armed forces. And that number is rapidly expanding. Chien Shiung Wu performed an historic experiment that overturned what had been considered a fundamental law of nature. Two male theoretical physicists hypothesized that the fundamental theory of parity was inaccurate, but were unable to develop an experiment to prove it. They consulted with Wu, an expert experimental physicist, who rose to the challenge and conducted a groundbreaking experiment that proved their hypothesis. She did not, however, share in their 1957 Nobel Prize. When Dr. Wu knocked out that principle of parity, she established the principle of parity between men and women. I have not found a real X to fill this role. So Xena, a warrior princess. All right, I just wanted to see if you were still paying attention. Roslin Yellow, a medical physicist, was the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize for Medicine and the first woman to win the Lasker Prize, both awarded for her development of radioimmunoassay, known as RIA, a method of quantifying minute amounts of biological substances in the body using radioactive labeled material. Mildred Babe Didrikson Zaharias was arguably the most versatile and accomplished athlete of the 20th century, male or female, and the greatest woman athlete of all time to date. Throughout her career, Zaharias excelled at basketball, track and field, and golf. In the process, she broke down social conventions and struggled against traditional expectations of femininity, paving the way for girls and women in sports to be successful, accepted, and respected.
Now I know my ABCs. Next time won't you sing with me?
Yay! Good work. Each of these women aspired to different ideas of success. They did not accept barriers that others tried to place in their way as they worked to achieve their goals. Many of them had passions that were not common or accepted for women of their time, be it physics or athletics, politics or space travel. That's what made them leaders. Some of these women balanced their careers with raising families, like Chien-Shiu Wu, who said, I love this, "There is only one thing worse than coming home from the lab to a sink full of dirty dishes. And that is not going to the lab at all." Some chose to dedicate their lives solely to their careers. These were choices that they made at difficult times to shape the lives they wanted. These choices they all made freely, and they were theirs to make. These are choices we are all obliged to help each other make, because they won't be the same. These are choices that are made powerful and actualized by a supportive and affirming institutional environment. What we all can learn from these women is that we each have our own path and that we must celebrate our individuality in our career choices and the journeys they create while rejecting the myth of perfection and as a standard of success. Looking around this room today, I see a lot of women who are both reflective of the world and deeply involved in it, making themselves and the women better through their choices every day. Don't stop. Don't be discouraged by the expectations of others. Defy them. Challenge them and challenge yourself and society to break free of old images of leadership. Thanks.